Actually, that one's Richard. G'day, everyone. Thanks for being patient. We were waiting for Senator David Pocock, who, as I said, has come straight from the Senate, where he was voting on an inquiry into Middle Arm. So we'll hear all about that very shortly. But welcome, everyone, this evening to the Australia Institute's Politics in the Pub. Thanks all so much for coming along. We have a full house tonight. We are packed. So we appreciate your support. Give yourselves a round of applause. This is the kind of civic participation we love to see. I would like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional owners, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Canberra is Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. The Australia Institute is very proud to support the Yes campaign, and I encourage anyone who hasn't really engaged with this issue yet to head on over to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Check it out for yourself, check out the Voice website, and make sure that you're informed and ready to engage in the campaign as we head to the referendum. We do love hosting Politics in the Pub for free. We love that you guys can come along, that anyone can come along and engage in Politics in the Pub, but it's not free to put on. So if you can chip in with a cash donation, or there's a tap and go donation point at the bar, we would sincerely appreciate it. And tonight is a really fantastic example of why the Australia Institute so loves to host events like Politics in the Pub, and why we love teaming up with organisations like Doctors for the Environment, who has brought more than, I think, 100 doctors and healthcare professionals from all around the country to Canberra today to converge on Parliament House, demanding that the Commonwealth block the key anti-gas extraction projects due to the serious health threats presented by the extraction of fossil fuels. Big round of applause for Doctors for the Environment. We work with them a lot and they do fantastic work. And the Australia Institute, we're always so delighted when our research can help community organisations, activists, and just people in general around Australia who want to get involved in issues and inform themselves on the issues and really participate in Australia's democracy. It's so fantastic to see. You will have all seen a briefing note from the Australia Institute with some information about the topic that we're discussing this evening. And can I just get a show of hands? Hands up if you're a doctor who's travelled for the action here in Canberra today. A round of applause. Thank you so much for caring so much about this important issue and for making it a real national issue and making sure the Parliament pays a lot of attention. The Australian Institute has done a huge amount of work on fracking in the Northern Territory, and you can head on over to our website to find all that past research. And rest assured, even though things look like they're full steam ahead at the moment, we won't be giving up until we can keep all fossil fuels in the ground. So the Australian government is investing big money into fracking in the Northern Territory, recently spending over $1.5 billion subsidising the Darwin Middle Arm precinct, which is a petrochemical and gas export hub in Darwin Harbour, for those who don't know. And it's pretty much designed to export fracked gas from the Beetaloo Basin. And so we know, obviously, about the dangers of fracking and how much fossil fuels are driving the climate crisis. And so to highlight the issues with this particular project with fracking in the Northern Territory, as I said, over 100 doctors and health professionals gathered on the lawns of Parliament House today, organised by Doctors for the Environment and supported by Monique and David Pocock, who are here with us this evening. So I am absolutely delighted to introduce our panel this evening. The guests are all tonight at the forefront of this fight, working inside and outside of Parliament to hold governments at the state and Commonwealth level to account. And it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Monique, the independent member for the Federal Electorate of Kooyong and former Director of Neurology at the Royal Children's Hospital. Please give her a hand. Senator David Pocock, independent senator for the ACT and a former football player, as some of you might be perhaps familiar with. Dr. Louise Woodward is a leading NT paediatrician at the Royal Darwin Hospital and the Darwin Private Hospital. Please give her a round of applause. Oh, sorry, we forgot to give David a round of applause. And Dr. Richard Dennis is the Executive Director of the Australia Institute. Please give him a hand. So obviously a panel of massive underachievers sitting beside me here tonight. No, it's such an important issue, and bringing so many people to Canberra is so important. Monique Ryan, you're a doctor and a member of Parliament. What was so important about today's action?
For me, the important thing about today was giving a voice to the paediatricians from the Northern Territory. One of the things about the way that Australian politics, I think, has changed in the last couple of years is that we've realised the importance of giving voice to people. And those of us who tried to do that have felt the power of what communities can achieve. So when Louise approached David and I think some of the other crossbench about the concerns that she had, it resonated really well. I mean, with me, an email from one paediatrician to another, and those of you who are doctors out there in the audience, and I know some of you, and it's been a great pleasure to see people today, know that when a colleague asks you for help, you respond as best you can. And so for me, it was an immediate yes, this is an important issue. It was something about which I was aware already, and I had concerns already, so it was an immediate point of comfort.
And Louise, can you tell us a bit more about this issue in particular, and why so many health professionals have travelled to Canberra today?
Yeah, absolutely. This issue is so important for the people of the Northern Territory, but also for the whole of Australia. This is such a huge project, and to be honest, ignorantly, I just assumed that it would not go ahead because it was so crazy. And when our Chief Minister green-lighted fracking, I was kind of shocked and horrified, and all of a sudden just lost trust in the political system, certainly in the Northern Territory. And that's when I guess a group of us in the Northern Territory all got together, and we kind of drew strength from each other. And you're all up there. A lot of the NT mob are up there in the audience. And with that strength, I guess we realised that it was up to us to actually raise the alarm from the Northern Territory. And so that's when we kind of, as a paediatric group from the hospital, we wrote a letter and sent it to the Chief Minister, and it was really dismissed. Our concerns about the health of the children in our community was dismissed. And that was also quite shocking. And so then I was like, all right, I don't accept that. So that's when, we reached out to David and Monique, and they've been so supportive in raising our voice. And kind of over that time, we've realised as a community of citizens, I guess, and also doctors, because I reached out when I was trying to reach out. I reached out to David and Monique, but I also reached out to some of my other colleagues at the Children's Hospital in Melbourne, where I'd worked before. So Karen and Mike, who then they were with Doctors for the Environment as well. So they kind of reached out to all of their networks, and all of a sudden, within a couple of weeks, we had a working group of about 10 to 15 people from all over Australia, which then expanded to about 30. And that was about 10 weeks ago. And that's all led to today, just over 10 weeks. And that's, led to 100 doctors coming to Canberra, to a letter to the Prime Minister signed by 2,300. And
round of applause.
And I hope that some of the people in power have taken notice. And I guess I'd also like to say that it's not just doctors. it's parents, it's vets, it's farmers, there's a whole huge group of people from the Northern Territory and around Australia that are really worried about this project.
And just for people who aren't health professionals or doctors in the audience, what's the nature of your concerns that you've raised here today in Canberra?
Yeah, so there's a lot of direct concerns about fracking and the effects on the people of the Beetaloo and any communities that live around fracking wells. And there's also the concerns about middle arm. I guess with fracking, there's air pollution, there's water pollution. And there's pollution that gets into the soil. And already we've had a report of one of the companies who are fracking in the Beetaloo Basin actually dispersing fracked water, which is full of, contaminants and heavy metals and all sorts of terrible things, using it for dust suppression in one of their exploratory wells, which is just horrifying because that then goes down in through the soil into the groundwater. It contaminates the grass where the cattle are grazing, and it's just an absolute disaster. And that's just with the exploratory wells. Like, what's going to happen when it goes to full production, when a company does not take the care that they need to protect the environment? You've also got that gas is going to be piped all the way to Darwin, and then you've got gas processing in, right in the middle of a huge, well, not a big city, it's smaller than Canberra, but we think it's a big city.
Yeah, we're big. What are you talking about?
And so then you've got, the air pollution that increases the risk of asthma. It makes all chronic diseases worse. And in the Northern Territory, we have the highest rate of chronic disease in the country because, anyway, it's going to make everything much worse. And they've got plans to make petrochemicals at this site with the feedstock from the Beetaloo Basin gas, and petrochemicals are known cancer-causing, cancer-causing pollution that goes through the air and can travel quite a distance. And there's really good evidence that shows that people living within 5 kilometres of petrochemical facilities have a 30% increased risk of leukemia. And that's just absolutely horrifying to me. And there's all these other potential cancers that will only become apparent in years to come because they take time to manifest. And, there's large populations in a suburb called Palmerston, which is only 3 kilometres from Middle Arm. So I think the whole of Darwin should be very, very concerned about this project.
David, you've come... Yeah, please. You've come straight from the Senate. Why don't you tell us all what you were voting on just before you got here?
Sure. We've been peppering them all day with the issue of Middle Arm, Beetaloo, and Barossa. And the final thing was Senator Hanson-Young and the Greens had a referral to a committee so the Senate could actually look into Middle Arm. The government months ago said that they would. They've since backflipped. They don't even want the Senate to be able to look into it. And so we had the government and the opposition voting against, I think, most of the crossbench, except One Nation, maybe, saying that we shouldn't have more scrutiny. And for me, this issue just highlights where we are at with climate change, where you have the direct impacts on population, the sort of the known impacts. If we do this, you'll increase leukemia by 30%. And we've got the climate impacts, which we know. And yet we have a government who refuses to listen to scientists, to doctors, to communities. It's frankly outrageous because there are good people in there. My AC colleague, Senator Gallagher, I've got a lot of time for her. She's voting for this. She's funding this. And this is the thing that we have to get fired up about, is that despite all the evidence, they are dooming our young people and future generations by continuing to expand the fossil industry in 2023.
Yeah, there's no excuse, is there?
And I just wanted to let you know that we actually provided all the MPs and their advisors that we met with today a report on all the new evidence released since 2018 on the health impacts of gas processing. So they have all the evidence.
Yeah, they can't say they didn't know
Yeah.
or they weren't warned. Richard, as I said, the Australia Institute's been looking into the economics and the climate impacts of fracking in the NT for quite a while. This has kind of come to a head now, but this is a choice, isn't it? They know what they're doing.
Yeah, unfortunately they do. I agree with David. I think, this is a uniquely bad idea at a uniquely important point in time. But, let's place it in its historical context. Australia is the world's third largest fossil fuel exporter. Saudi Arabia 1, Russia 2, Australia 3. That's us. That's not you, but that's who we as a country are. We're the third biggest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. We subsidise this. We know that subsidies are bad. We know that the neoliberal right-wing people, they hate subsidies, except when it comes to private schools, private health insurance, and fossil fuels. And it was Barnaby Joyce who announced the $1.5 billion for Middle Arm. Right? In the months leading up to the last election, it was Barnaby Joyce made the announcement. It was coalition policy to put $1.5 billion into Middle Arm, but it was the current government that put $1.5 billion into the budget for it in their first budget, and that little mini budget they had in October after their election. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't, not you, I trust you, but the person sitting next to you, I'm not so sure about. Because somewhere in Australia, there must be a clamour for this, right? We all get told how hard it would be to find $1.5 billion for children's health. We know how hard it would be to get $1 billion for education. We know how $1 billion, money doesn't grow on trees, Richard, except, Middle Arm, it's not even worth talking about, not even worth inquiring into. So, yeah, look, unfortunately, Australians don't see themselves in this way, but our governments do, state and federal, Labor and Liberal. We see ourselves as a petrochemical exporter to the world. And that's why there's 110 new gas and coal projects in the pipeline right now. And people don't want them. The public doesn't want them. The climate doesn't need them. The UN Secretary General says, we've got global boiling and we don't need none of these projects. But that message, for reasons that you can ask David and Monique about, that message hasn't got through to the new government that won on a climate agenda.
Yeah, both David and Monique, you campaigned very hard on climate change in the lead up to the election. Monique, can you tell me a little bit more about the climate impacts of these kinds of projects going ahead and, I guess, why it's important for the Parliament to address and for the government to address?
Well, if we look just at Beetaloo Basin, which is a massive development in the Northern Territory, which doesn't yet have any approvals in place, but we understand that the environmental impact statement for Beetaloo is sitting on Tanya Plibersek's desk as we speak. It would unleash a 1.4 billion tonne carbon bomb, essentially, 1.4 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions, which would essentially cancel out everything that everyone else is doing in this country. And one of the issues in the last week or two is, that there's been a few ad feminine attacks from the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory against the doctors and against the, entitled teals speaking out against this project, saying, you've got no right to say anything about this. This is the Northern Territory's business. But in fact, those 1.4 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide will negate all the other things that we're doing to mitigate or cut down or offset our carbon emissions. Yeah, the impact of that is just extreme. And the numbers are so large that they're actually hard to comprehend. But the Middle Arm would also not only facilitate Beetaloo, would also facilitate transfer of gas from the Barossa project. And Middle Arm will be basically the processing centre for liquefied CO2 to be pumped from Darwin Harbour to the depleted Bayou Undan field off the coast of Timor-Leste. And last week, the government voted in favour of allowing that CO2 to be pumped under the seabed next to Timor-Leste as for carbon capture and storage. And the idea there is that then is the carbon capture and storage, which will allow offsetting of the Barossa gas field. So, it's just a cumulative process of increasing permissions for increasing projects, which won't be active for 5 or 10 years. Barossa wouldn't be an active, or even Beetaloo, for at least 5 years. But so we're not talking about the transition fuels that we're talking about that we need for now. We're talking about 5 or 10 years down the track. It blows out of the water any prospect of us meeting the sorts of emissions reductions that we've theoretically committed to.
Louise, you were talking about some of the health impacts, and in particular that the NT has some pretty poor health statistics. Can you tell us a little bit particularly about the impact on kids? Because I know a lot of paediatricians and child doctors were involved today.
Yeah, so I mean, there's huge impacts on kids. I guess, in terms of air pollution, children are smaller, they have a faster respiratory rate, so they generally take in more pollution, if there's any kind of pollution in the air, so they're much more vulnerable. But it's also unborn children, so pregnant women as well take in more pollution, and it has a greater effect on them. And so, for children, they have increased asthma severity. And certainly I'd be very interested in doing some, just some studies in the Northern Territory right now. Over the last 10 years, the asthma presentations since we've had LNG processing in Darwin versus the 10 years before. It'd be really interesting to see if there's been a difference from the LNG processing we already have. And the thing with air pollution is it's cumulative. So every insult, just adds more particles to the air, which can then cause harm. So we've got 2 LNG processing plants already. We have in the dry season, we have, bushfires. And so that's particulate matter in the air. They kind of combine together along with heat. And if there's not much wind, it all just kind of sits there. And, I went for a run the other day and it was actually quite difficult to breathe. I was like, I don't know if I should be running at the moment. But then you think of, all the kids with chronic disease that we have in the Territory. We've got the highest rate of suppurative lung disease, in the country. We've got kids with rheumatic heart disease who, have a lot of trouble breathing clean air, let alone, toxic, dirty air. We've got kids, with diabetes, and these kind of pollution goes through the lungs into the bloodstream and can make diabetes control much harder. And then you've got, the unborn. So there's quite strong evidence that communities living around gas processing facilities have increased rates of low birth weight, increased abnormalities in their babies, increased stillbirth rates, miscarriage. It's really, really terrifying. And it's really, and then that's not even going into the climate effects. I mean, the top end is the front line of climate change, and we can all feel it. It is getting hotter, as Suki said this morning. Mummy, it is too hot here. It is too hot in Darwin. Every year there are more and more heat stress days. And I guess a heat stress day happens when you have temperatures over 34 degrees with high humidity. That's when you can't cool down unless you have air conditioning. So just a fan won't work. And it means that people who don't have access to air conditioning, and in the Northern Territory, our rate of homelessness is 12 times the national average. So there's lots of people who cannot escape the heat. What do they do?
David, I'll come to you next. Richard kind of talked about the choices that the government is making. You've been very critical of the fossil fuel subsidies and other measures that the government is essentially taking to not rein in fossil fuels but promote them. What are some of your concerns around the level of subsidies there, and how do you think the Parliament can address it?
Well, the subsidies continue. $1.5 billion to unlock all of these projects for an industry that's making windfall record tens of billions of dollars of profit and aren't paying any sort of petroleum resource rent tax, just paying a bit of company tax like everyone else. The really worrying thing for me is the talking points from the government are straight out of the fossil fuel companies. It's the same thing about trying to paint Middle Arm as this sustainable hub. Oh, sure, there'll be a little bit of gas, but it's mostly about renewables and the transition. And you hear it every day in the Senate. There's talk about the transition. Well, we need more gas for the transition. We finally have a government that accepts the science on climate change. They're very open with that. They'll say, we accept the science. They just won't listen to scientists. And that's terrifying, because when you look at what is happening elsewhere in the world and you look at the El Nino that's coming, this summer will likely be hot. The following one could be catastrophic. And yet we continue to approve coal mines, gas projects. And we continue to have them talk about this like this is something that we need. We desperately need this. We've got to continue down this path. And I don't know what you do. I lost my cool in question time today, because you may as well be sitting down with the petroleum lobby, with APR. It's the exact same talking points.
And does it, yeah.
I think they're clapping because you lost your cool, Dave.
I wish I'd seen that.
And does it worry you too? I don't know, like I feel like this is going to be very cynical, but after many years in federal politics, I'm kind of used to governments ignoring scientists, but I do feel like they pay attention to doctors, and we've had recent huge public health problem where doctors were giving us press conferences every day and really at the forefront of a policy response, and we paid a lot of attention to that, and now we're ignoring them in the same way. Is that your impression?
It is. In question time, I pointed out that during the pandemic, the now Prime Minister wrote an op-ed where he said the thing that we've learned from COVID is that we have to listen to scientists. It's extraordinary. And I think it just points out that there is this state capture. They are terrified of the gas companies. They consult them when they want to increase their taxes, right? The PRRT, you look at the list of people who consulted, all the gas companies. Well, what do you think about us taxing you a bit more? Don't like it? Okay, cool. We'll go for the option that doesn't tax you more. It just makes you pay a little bit earlier. It's outrageous. Like, this is all of our futures on the line, and particularly young people. The last couple of months, we've been working on this duty of care bill, and as part of it, reading a bunch about the climate science and talking to climate scientists at the ANU and elsewhere. And it's frankly terrifying. Today in the Senate, we heard the coalition's contribution was that it's climate extremists who are doing this. And I said, well, are pediatricians now climate extremists? Are 2,300 doctors climate extremists? So
They're trolls.
Yeah, it's really on all of us. We've all got a local MP, and the only language they seem to really care about is whether or not they can have a seat at the next election, truly. And that's the task, is to really show them that this is the issue that we're going to vote on.
Richard, David was talking there about some of the talking points that the government is using, that this is a transition and we're on the way to the transition. Is that how you understand the word transition to work?
Oh, I think it can mean anything you want. Polly Hemming, who works at the Australian Institute, and I did a spin bin video a couple of weeks ago where we kind of slowly went through the Northern Territory Chief Minister's announcement when she was sort of backing this in, because of course it was Labor policy to ban fracking in the NT. Like, the NT Labor banned fracking. This is NT Labor completely reneging on their old idea. So we went through this press conference, and in the press conference, the NT chief minister was basically talking about the world's most magical gas, because what it was going to do simultaneously was push gas prices down in Australia immediately, but not come online for 5 years, and we were going to export it all. Like, it's magic gas. It can just solve any problem you wanna pick. It's lower emission than other people's gas. This is not true. It's going to simultaneously be burnt by us and by people overseas. This is not true. It's going to pay lots of tax. This is not true. And of course, it's going to employ everybody. This is not true. To give you a sense of it, there's 26 million people in Australia. A whole 20 or so thousand work in oil and gas. Uniting Care employs 40,000. But somehow the gas industry is the backbone of our economy. Now, again, we're the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. The third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. Oil and gas and coal combined employ less people than Uniting Care and Anglicare. Oil, coal and gas employ less people. All the fossil fuel industries employ less people than Uniting Care plus Anglicare. But we just know that all of our jobs, that somehow it's the backbone of our economy. The backbone. Well, most countries in the world don't have an export industry in fossil fuels. Are they spineless? How do they even work? How can other countries exist? We're so insecure. Not you, but again, that person sitting next to you. We're so insecure that we actually fall for these talking points. They don't pay much tax. They don't employ many people. They make huge profits. Absolutely. And if you have a look at that bit of paper we handed out, there's two fun graphs on there. One compares the emissions from the Tamboran project with emissions from all the coal-fired power stations in Australia. The magic gas that the NT Chief Minister talked about was going to help shut down coal-fired power stations. No, it's going to put out more emissions than all of them. So the talking points are, to use an economic phrase, just bullshit.
If I can just follow up on that, Richard. We're going to come to questions from the audience shortly. So if you can start having a think about that. And we've got a microphone down here at the front, and we'll ask you to just form a line behind there, and we'll start taking some questions from the audience soon. But Richard, forgive me, I've just come back from a European holiday, and I happen to be in Norway, and I know they tax their fossil fuel industry a lot different to us. What do they do differently?
It's this crazy imaginary place called Norway, and what it does is collect a lot of tax from its oil and gas and make itself one of the richest, happiest places in the world. But in Australia, we actually talk about this like it's hypothetical. Like, what would happen if a country did this? I don't know, like Norway. No, like, we need evidence. What, like Norway? All right. So Australia's the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world. Qatar is the second largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world. Qatar collects 20 times more tax on gas than we do. Right? It's not an accident that we don't collect any tax from our fossil fuel industry. It's a choice. And to give you a sense of the consequence of this choice, in Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry and give university education away for free to their young people. In Australia, we subsidise our fossil fuel industry and charge young people a fortune to go to university. So I know that tax is boring, and I know that inter-country comparisons of policy isn't everybody's fun game, but other countries, like Norway, make radically different decisions to us. And as a result, they have a radically different society than us. It just happens to be richer, happier, healthier, and according to pretty much all the economic data, a more productive economy than our own. But in Australia, we act as if this is somehow hypothetical or imaginary or utopian. It's just a choice.
Can I invite audience members who've got a question to come down here, straight down the middle? I know we're packed and it's a little bit hard to get in here, and just form a line. And if I may put my former Tony Jones Q&A host hat on, if we can all ask questions and not make speeches, we would be most appreciative. And we'll have likely a lot of questions this evening. So if you can say your name and who you're addressing your question to, that would be most appreciated. We'll start with you. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Jay, and thank you all. My question is particularly to the federal members of parliament. My question is whether sometimes in the fight against fracking and other issues, civil disobedience is necessary. What can you do to support the right to protest?
David, do you want to take that one first?
The crackdown we've seen on protesters around the country is incredibly worrying. You look through history and there hasn't been much progress without struggle, and with people being willing to sacrifice their civil liberties for the things that they care about. And it's something I think we've really got to push the government on, state governments, when it comes to protesters being able to express their views. If the government's not listening to you in a democracy, that's the avenue that people take. So something we have been looking at, clearly really sort of does fall with the states, but very worrying. And no surprise that governments that aren't doing what's necessary to look after people are then trying to lock them up if they point that out in ways that actually raise attention.
Monique, anything you want to?
No, I completely agree. I think that the current crackdown on protests is hugely disturbing and concerning from a democratic point of view. We're actually in a slightly difficult position. In Victoria, there is no functional opposition to the Andrews government. And it's the same in WA. And the state governments is a little bit untrammeled in their actions at the moment. They're not being held accountable for changes in the law which have real civil liberties and social justice implications. And I think at a state level, it does need to be talked about. And it hasn't been, I know it hasn't been spoken about in the House at all, but a number of us who are there are concerned about the legislative changes that have happened at a state level to clamp down on this. And I think it does need further discussion.
And just before we go to the next question, David, I know you've been arrested in the past and locked on. What kind of people are at protests that are doing this direct action? Who were you alongside when you've done protests like that and done direct action in the past?
I spent the day locked on with a fifth generation farmer, Rick Laird. The Laird State Forest, a critically endangered boxgum woodland, is now the site of a Whitehaven coal mine. At the time, farmers were concerned about the impact on them, on the climate. Basically, all of their concerns have been proved valid. During the last drought, Whitehaven stole 1 billion litres of water that they needed for the mine.
Who amongst us has not?
And it was just a group of ordinary people who had a gutful, and I think all, for various reasons, had come to the point where they'd done all the petitions and rallies, but this was something that they felt they needed to do.
Next question from this gentleman.
I'm Alan from Melbourne, and my question is, why is there this unholy alliance between a Labor Party, the Liberal Party, and the Northern Territory government to use gas to transition to net zero? And we were told in Parliament House today that Australians must sacrifice to achieve this. And we've chosen the people of the Beetaloo Basin and the people of Darwin to make that sacrifice. How does that work?
Do you want to take that one first, Richard?
Yeah. Look, I hate to say it. Let's just be honest. We're not in Australia today. We're not transitioning our economy away from fossil fuels. We're transitioning it towards fossil fuels. We are not talking about staging the closure of our fossil fuel industry. We are subsidising the expansion of our fossil fuel industry. The only zero getting talked about is the nonsensical notion of net zero, where we get to increase fossil fuel production and tell ourselves it's okay because someone didn't chop down a tree. So unfortunately, your simple question, there is no answer to it. We're not transitioning towards a no fossil fuel economy. We're transitioning towards an economy where we're going to extract fossil fuels from parts of Australia that have never mined them before. So
it's a political question. You've got Labor Party, Liberal Party, Northern Territory government, all in agreement. This is very unusual.
no, I disagree. I'll let the MPs say, but Labor and Liberal vote with each other on probably 70, 80% of legislation. Like, it's not uncontroversial that the major parties vote together. Indeed, they often vote together with support from the crossbench. There's plenty of legislation that we don't hear about that most people vote for. Why are they united in this? Well, the simple answer is they're more afraid of the gas industry than they are of voters.
But why are they choosing the people of the Northern Territory to suffer the consequences? If you're old enough, you'll remember the Brisbane line. When Australia was going to be invaded, Joe Lyons elected to sacrifice all of Australia above Brisbane. We're electing to sacrifice the people of the Northern Territory. Why?
As I read it, they're actually walking straight towards that sacrifice with open hands while throwing lumps of coal at those of us who are trying to oppose it. It's really unfortunate that the Northern Territory government is complicit with this. Let's not forget that. This is a Labor government, as we've heard in 2018. The Labor NT government stopped fracking, and now they are running back towards it with open arms. And they are captured. I mean, they talk about jobs, they talk about income for the territory, but it's very clear that those are very limited and very short-term gains. There's more at play. One of the concerns about what's happened in Australian politics in the last 5 to 10 years is the forces behind many of the decisions that have been made. And I think we've heard in the last small while about some of the external interests which are having an impact on decision making by the major political parties. And I think we'll hear more about that in the next few years.
David, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I think it's complex because it's tied in with political donations, with lobbying, the extraordinary power of companies like Woodside, like Santos, who can afford to pay, pretty good teams of lobbyists and a PR machine, and this revolving door of staffers and politicians working for Santos or having family members at different fossil fuel companies. It's this tangled web, and I think it's only when we start to address things like money in politics, where's that coming from? Where's the transparency? Where's the lobbying transparency? There's 2,000 people who can access that building 24/7. We don't know any of their names. And that's very convenient for the major parties. And you try and raise that with them, and it's like you're speaking another language. They don't want to hear it. So I think it's incumbent on crossbenchers and the minor parties to force the government to deal with those things, because I think it's only when we do that we might see better decisions being made.
Louise, before we go to the next question, I just want to ask you about NT politics, I guess, and that commentary that why are we inflicting this on the NT? Is it because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for the rest of the country? These kinds of things like nuclear waste dumps, it is the kind of thing that ends up being dumped on the Northern Territory, isn't it?
I mean, I can't talk for the rest of the country. I'm a Northern Territorian, and I think it's a place with big, wide open spaces, so it's easy to get away with a lot in the outback of the Northern Territory. So it's a great place if you're a company wanting to come and frack, because no one will see what you're doing. But I think we've certainly felt very, very frustrated and very, very unheard in the Northern Territory. You know, I guess all of our extended group of friends, you know, are all very at a loss, I guess, with the decision making currently in the Northern Territory government, and there doesn't seem to be a care that they will get voted out. They seem to assume that they will get in no matter what, and that's a little bit of a concern to me, because there's a lot of people very upset in the Northern Territory.
Next question, thank you.
Yes, hi, good evening. John Schilling from Canberra. I heard the expression carbon capture and storage mentioned just once this evening. To your knowledge, is there any engineering substance to this now, or is it just a vague dream of bringing back the Carboniferous and drawing down vast amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere when all the trees disappeared and became coal?
I might take this one. This is my personal pet peeve, carbon capture and storage. And I don't know if you read my column in the Canberra Times occasionally, but I've done quite a few on just the massive failure that carbon capture and storage is in Australia and around the world. And governments at the state and Commonwealth level and internationally just seem to keep throwing money at it. I've visited in the past Australia's premier carbon capture and storage. I think it was called the Zero Gen project at the time. When we rocked up, it was a paddock. It's probably still a paddock. We've invested so much public money into this, and it was something that the fossil fuel companies were originally supposed to pay for. They ploughed a lot of money into it. They haven't been able to make it work anywhere unless it's about extracting more oil from depleted oil fields, and one of the ways you can do that is pump a bunch of stuff more in it to pull out. So it's absolutely just, it doesn't really exist commercially anywhere. It's been promised that it's about 10 years away every year for the last 20, 30 years, Richard,
Yep.
would you say?
Yep.
So yes, massive pipe dream. We're throwing yet more money at it, and it is one of the key reasons that this project in the Northern Territory is supposed to get off the ground. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to come in here, but Monique, you were talking about that project off Timor-Leste. That's a key part of why we're proceeding with this, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's a great idea. So the idea there is you take a depleted oil gas field off Timor-Leste, the Bayou Undan field, and there's a 20-year-old pipe from there to Darwin. And so what we're going to do, this is just genius, is you take that pipe, it's been there for 20 years, and you get the carbon dioxide from Beetaloo or from Barossa, and you liquefy it. And then under massive pressure, much higher than the pressure that the LNG has been coming through it in the other direction for the last 20 years, we pump that CO2, the liquefied CO2, back to Bayou Undan and then stick it under the seabed there. Now, liquefied CO2, it turns out, is incredibly corrosive. And we're pumping it the wrong way up a 20-year-old pipe under enormous pressure. And a single leak will result in acidification of the seas, asphyxiation of marine life. It's genius. And the government and the opposition voted in favour of that in the House of Reps last week. Shame.
Can I just add on this Barossa project? I met with, there's a delegation from the Tiwi Islands who honestly doing such incredible work. Definitely try and say hi to one of them after this. They've managed to put a halt to Santos's pipeline while it's properly assessed.
Round of applause.
A huge win. But the gas in Barossa is some of the dirtiest gas Australia has ever decided to try and get out of the ground. You look at what, 16 to 20% CO2.
18%.
So much CO2 that you can't pipe that CO2 to Darwin. So what will we do? We'll just vent it. So the plan is to vent that CO2 out at sea And then at some point, we will have the CCS technology
It's 10 years away, David.
to rather than vent it, we're going to put it back down there. These are the kind of sort of ideas and workarounds that are allowing these projects to go ahead at a time where we know they can't.
Yeah, I think in the past I've called this whole Northern Territory thing a turducken of greenwash because it's like no matter how many layers you peel away, there's just something kind of grosser and worse in the middle of it.
And any reference of a turducken is a good thing. So, look, let me just quickly add, and by the way, I saw Kirsty Howie here from the Northern Territory Environment Centre. Can we please give them a shout out as well?
Round of applause.
You know, not just for the work they've done in helping to organise today, but just for the campaigns that we're hearing so much about tonight, and really just if you want to support people that are doing work really out there on the front line, please do. All of this work to make this happen, a long way away, is done by hardworking people with lives to live. If it weren't for the idiocy of these people. Just very quickly on carbon capture and storage, there is one very proven successful technology. It's called a tree, and it literally captures carbon and sequesters it in something called its trunk. And we subsidise the logging of old growth forests in Australia. So, like, we're just taking the piss with all of this stuff. We know how to capture carbon. You do it in trees, and we're chopping them down. So, we need sort of a reality check on all of this stuff. And unfortunately, the kind of schemes that we're hearing about tonight, when we do actually go and bury that CO2, if it ever even happened, we'd be generating carbon credits for doing that, which would let them pollute more. So even if carbon capture and storage works, which it won't, it'll be used as an excuse to burn more fossil fuels. We're through the looking glass on this stuff.
We've got 3 people here with questions and not a lot of time, so I'm actually going to get you to ask each question and we'll try and answer them as much as we can. So first you, and then we'll go to the next 2 people.
Hi, I'm Jules Kelly. I'm a Canberra local. Given the increasing necessity of serious action against climate change, as well as the fact that changing the government has not resulted in any meaningful policy change, how long before it becomes our moral and ethical duty to take serious direct action against fossil fuel infrastructure, whether legal or not?
Thank you. Next question after that.
Yeah, hi, Eric Albury. I'm here all the way from Canberra. And my question is it a done deal that Beetaloo's going ahead? And if not, what are the actions or what are the strategies that could stop it from going ahead?
Okay, and our last question.
I'm Vincent. I'm from WA. My question...
Vincent, can you come to the microphone?
Yes. Hello. My question had to do... so on the East Coast, 70% of our electricity comes from coal. 90% of the emissions from fossil fuel export that Australia makes come from coal. Coal, all the petroleum in the world, oil and gas, is only 20% more emissions than coal. As a young person, my fear is that we are losing sight of what the real risk to climate change is for humanity, which is coal. And I was wondering if we could, as important as all the fracking stuff is, I was wondering if we could get a clear statement that coal, its export, its production, its use for electricity is the biggest threat to climate action that we face. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for our questions, everyone. So we've got a question on the importance of and the moral imperative of direct action, I believe. One on other things that we can be doing to stop Beetaloo and Middle Arm, and the last one there on coal. I don't know who wants to take that in what order. Richard, I might come to you first. I'm going to dob you in.
This is the first time I've ever been accused of not talking about coal enough. So couldn't agree more. Australia is the largest exporter of coal in the world. Sometimes Indonesia pips us. and the Australia Institute's been calling for a moratorium on new coal mines for a very long time. David signed it back when he was Wallabies captain, I think. So, look, you're absolutely right. We don't need to stop a particular fossil fuel. We need to stop them all. We're here tonight talking about a uniquely dumb idea that's happening in the Northern Territory right now. But come back in a couple of weeks' time, I'm sure we can put something on some pretty dumb coal ideas as well. So I don't mean to mock your question. You're right. But the health consequences, the absurdity of the subsidy, and the enormity of this particular gas project, I think that's why we're here talking about it tonight. It's not the only thing we need to do, but frankly, if we can't stop this one, boy, are we in trouble.
David, I'm going to ask you about the direct action stuff because you touched on that earlier with the protests. Do you think that's where we're headed? If governments aren't responding, that people more and more are going to be inspired to join in direct action type things like which you've engaged in?
Well, it's happening already. We're seeing it across the country, around the world. I would say that we do have an incredible democracy, and a minority government could see a big change in direction. You look at the crossbench, and when you're actually listening to your community, the things you're hearing is, we want action that ensures that we have a safe climate. Our children have a safe climate. Their children have a safe climate. That leads to vastly different decision making that we're currently seeing. And you look at both major political parties, and their grip seems tenuous. Like they don't have huge majorities. And so I would argue that leading into the next election, there's a lot of work to do to put the case to people and to push beyond their scaremongering, because we're going to hear from both parties at this next one about how a minority government will be chaos. Look at the Nordic countries, seems to work reasonably well for them. And so I think you need both, and I think we'll see both. But I would urge people on when it comes to politics, like get involved. It seems like a ridiculous thing to say, but calling your MP during a sitting day, it's a massive hassle when your phone is just going off the hook and there's other stuff happening. You get the message pretty quickly. And so there's other ways to mobilise. There's other ways to mobilise and to target people. So I'd hope we start to see a lot more of all those things.
Louise, I wonder if you could touch on that question of what people can do and what you've been here today to try and do to stop middle arm.
Yeah, and so I guess middle arm is not a done deal yet. The money might have been promised, but it's not been delivered yet. So we can stop middle arm. And I guess we came here to Canberra as, a massive group of health professionals and parents and vets to come. I kind of see it almost as direct action, because our aim was to come here to Canberra to make the fossil fuel companies look really bad by telling the truth that they're actually harming and potentially killing people with their product. And I'm really hoping that makes the fossil fuel companies feel a bit of shame, at least, or maybe feel a bit of embarrassment. I don't know.
Can I just add one thing? I don't know if you've seen, I haven't used this word for a while, the kerfuffle about poor Meg O'Neill, the head of Woodside. Someone stood on her driveway. and I mean, I don't know, maybe we should offer her some help or something, because she really is struggling with this invasion of her privacy. Look how sensitive these people are to criticism. Look how sensitive they are. The reason they fear direct action is that they actually fear all forms of protest. They fear all forms of democratic expression, because they know how unpopular it is. So I really do think people should feel safe in their home. I do. But the overreaction of the media, of some people standing out the front of her house or a television camera going to film that, shows you just how vulnerable they feel to hopefully not to violence. I'm not suggesting that for a minute, but how vulnerable they feel to this kind of scrutiny. I mean, frankly, it takes a CEO of a mining company to make a mine happen. There are people making these choices, and they'd rather just get the paycheck and not the scrutiny.
Monique?
Well, we don't have it, but David and the crossbench are pushing for it. Sorry, Monique.
It's coming. It is coming. Real-time disclosure and electoral reform is coming before the next federal election. There's no doubt about it. David's been working on it. A number of the crossbench has been working on it. That will be coming. I actually take issue with what you just said, Richard, because recently I came home. I was having a problem with a staffer. She was suing me, and I came home and there were a number of there were reporters on my front doorstep, and my kids were scared, and I did not appreciate it. I did not think it was appropriate. I'm all in favour of direct action of the sort that we've seen today, and I can tell you that was incredibly powerful. Doctors coming to Parliament, vets, parents coming to Parliament and talking about the concerns that they had was really, really powerful. You don't have to come to Canberra. You can do it in other ways. 1/3 of Australians voted for non-major parties in the last federal election. If it's what, if 4, 6, then my fractions are going. But yeah, you can make a change. You can make a change very directly, probably as early as September of next year in the next federal election. You can make a change at a state level where it really needs to happen on a number of issues, as we've touched on tonight, in the next 12 to 18 months. This is an incredibly powerful democracy, and you do have a voice. And what we've learned in the last 2 years is that each of us have more of a voice than we thought we had. And I'm not saying against direct. I don't like people going to people's homes. I don't like, because I think there are other implications for other family members. I found it really distressing when the press came to my home. I couldn't quite conceive that they thought that was appropriate, actually. So I don't quite agree with you on that one. But you can take direct action in ways that are not physically provocative or aggressive, but which are extremely powerful. And as David said, call your local member, speak to them, write to them. They do listen more than you think that they do.
Thank you. I wonder if I can just get a final message from you about if you could talk to the Prime Minister today, Louise, and give them a message. What would it be?
We did get to talk to his advisor. We got a meeting with his advisor. I guess, if we could meet with him tomorrow, I would implore him to first do no harm and to have a duty of care to people, and that all decisions of government should put people first, no matter what they are, because why else are you in power, Mr. Albanese, if you don't put the people who you lead first?
Please thank Dr. Louise Woodward, Dr. Monique Ryan, Dr. Dennis and Senator Pocock this evening, our panel. Can we please give another round of applause to everyone in the audience tonight who's travelled from elsewhere for the action today? And a big round of applause for Doctors for the Environment who helped pull it all together. Thank you to everyone who came up and gave a question to our panel tonight. Thank you all so much for being a fantastic audience. I want to thank Verity Lane Market, where we all are this evening. If you haven't already, head downstairs and grab a meal. It's delicious. Don't forget you can get drinks from the bar as well. We love being here at Verity Lane Market and we appreciate their support a lot. I want to thank my wonderful colleagues, Hayden, Eleanor, Jackie and Lucci for their help this evening, making sure this all works, and our fabulous audio tech as well. Don't forget to sign up to the Australia Institute subscriber list and get on the mailing list for Politics in the Pub. Our next one next month is From Politics to Paradise, the villain edit with former staffer Alicia Aitken-Radburn, who was also on The Bachelor. So that'll be a bit of, and a former staffer who was on The Bachelor. So a bit of politics, a bit of reality TV, the villain edit. It's going to be fantastic and a little bit of a change from our normal speed. You can find more details of that on australiainstitute.org.au. We're looking forward to that one. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, Follow the Money, where we explain economics in plain English. Our next episode should be up tomorrow or the day after that. And as I said, please don't forget to chip in and help support the Australia Institute. All donations, big and small, are very valued. We don't get government funding. We don't get funding from Santos or Woodside or Origin or any of those places. I'm sure it's just 10 years away, Richard. Thank you again this evening for coming out. We love Politics in the Pub and we love that you all come every month. We hope to see you again next month.